Hi, everyone. I see we have people still coming in, so we'll wait for maybe a minute or two and then we'll officially get started. I'm Katarina Manoff, Engine CEO, for those who don't know me yet. And we have our guest Dora from Razom here. And I will introduce Dora and get things going in just a minute as we wait for maybe a few more late coming participants. While we are waiting, I will take a minute to review some administrative pieces. We would love for all of you to have your cameras on if you are able. I think it creates more of a community feel, so we always love seeing your faces. If not possible, don't worry about it at all. And we would like to ask all of you to stay on mute. We do have a bigger group here, and we want to make sure everyone can hear well. So please do keep those mics muted. But as always, we have our chat and we are really happy to hear from you anytime throughout the event. If you want to comment on something Dora or I are saying, if you have a question, we might not get to it right away, but we've definitely planned for time for questions from all of you at the end. So you don't have to wait till the end. If something piques your interest, please just drop that question into the chat. And yeah, we'll go for about 45-ish minutes timing wise. And what we'll do is first we'll have a conversation between me and Dora and we'll hear from her on a few topics. And then as I mentioned, we'll have the Q&A. And I see we still have people joining, but I want to stay more or less on schedule. So I think we will go ahead and get started. Just quickly, for those who have just joined us and may not have heard my administrative pieces, please keep your microphone on mute. And if you would like, we would love to have your camera on. So cameras, yes, microphones, no. All right. I think we can now officially get started. We have wow, 50 of us here already, and Emily will let any latecomers in if we have more. So welcome again, everyone. I am Katarina, your founder and CEO, and I am super excited to have one of my role models here.
Hi there. Good. How are
Do we
you?
have some background noise? Hold on. All right. As I was saying, I was happy to have one of my role models here. Welcome, Dora. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's great to be here. I mean, I'm really excited to see such a big community and dip into everything that you've built. I'm really eager to I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Wonderful. And from my end, before we dive in, I have to say that I've been such a big fan of Razom from almost the very beginning. I still remember around, I don't know if it was 2014 or 2015, my mom sent me this article in our local diaspora newspaper saying, oh my gosh, look, there's these girls in New York doing really cool work to support Ukraine. You know, it's a volunteer initiative and they're same age as you and look at all the great work that they're doing. And that actually is what inspired me to go down this path to look for organizations where I could volunteer, to get involved in a bunch of initiatives supporting Ukraine. Including Ukraine Global Scholars, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Dora, and a bunch of other ones, and eventually led me down the path of starting Engine. So and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been inspired by your work. So it feels like as we celebrate our 5th anniversary, and you guys have been around for what, over 10 years now, yeah.
Yeah,
Great to come together. All right,
it is.
well.
It is actually,
I would love
it's awesome to hear how sort of you found Razom, because it's kind of similar to how I found Razom. I was,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there was I was living in New York, and there were these people doing things, and I didn't know them, and they turned out to be a bunch of people from Ukraine, and it was but really sort of doing very useful things. So I love to hear Katarina stories like yours, where it's like, yeah, get involved and then build something. And look, now 5 years of Engine. And here we are. Yes, someone put in chat today on Vyshyvanka Day. I'm representing our colleagues in Ukraine. Or it's great to see in our office here in New York, and we had a video call with our office in Washington, Lviv, and Kyiv, and it's really neat to see how everyone's kind of busting out their Vyshyvanka today. It's we could do a whole fashion
wonderful.
show.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have mine. You can't really see the
noticed.
sign, but yes, Um,
Oh.
in our team chat today, we've been, sharing pictures of those who are wearing Vyshyvankas. So I'm glad someone noticed that. That's,
Mhm.
it speaks to how we're sharing Ukrainian culture with non-Ukrainians and Engine, right? This is part of the magic that we get to
Mhm.
share our rich and beautiful culture, which is
Yeah.
Vyshyvankas, but also so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So Dora, let's dive in. Rather than me doing a formal introduction of you, I would love for you
Mhm.
to share a little bit about yourself. And you already sort of started talking about how you stumbled upon Razom, but I would love to hear sort of what your background, your story, what you were doing before then, and then what you did when you got involved, and then how you ended up becoming the leader of this organization.
Sure, I'll keep it brief because I really want to have a lot of conversation and questions from everybody. Um, but just to kind of ground people in sort of who it is I am. I was born here in New York City. Both of my parents were born in what's now Ukraine. And I was not able to travel to Ukraine until I was halfway through college. That's when I was able to get a visa because it was the Soviet Union, which I think I see we get like 60 people on the call now, but I sort of remind that like as an American citizen, I couldn't just pop in and see my cousins and aunts and uncles in Ukraine. But midway through undergraduate at Princeton, I was able to go on an exchange program. And I just got hooked, really, everything that was happening in Ukraine in the summer of 1989. And I went to Moscow and then Leningrad as well. I got really interested and continued to return there. So I've had a career in between nonprofit and for-profit corporate America sector, got my MBA at Columbia, and I started volunteering at Razom in May 2014-ish. The organization was founded in the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. And I volunteered in various capacities and was a board member. And then in March of 2023, we realized we needed to professionalize and systematize and go from being an ad hoc volunteer group to being an institution. And that's when we created the role of CEO. And I was hired by the board. I had been on the board and then I resigned from the board and then was hired by the board. So since March of 2023, I've been the CEO of Erasmus.
So did you know, before the full-scale invasion that this is something that you might want to do? Did you ever think you'd be professionally a CEO of a nonprofit, or were you thinking, well, I'm going to have sort of a more traditional corporate career and do this volunteer work on the side, and then it just kind of happened?
Yeah, well, I had the corporate career and I had worked in nonprofit. My first job out of college was for the International Renaissance Foundation, which was the independent Soros Foundation that had been
Mhm.
founded in Ukraine, Soviet Ukraine, and then independent Ukraine. And I'm smiling because right before the full scale invasion, I was planning my offboarding from being on the board. Right. I
Mhm.
thought like here I've, contributed what I can and we have term limits on our board and it was, time to try something else. And I was kind of mapping out a different path for myself. And then with the full scale invasion, kind of we started seeing things at the end of 2021, but certainly by January 2022. And then of course, February, when the tanks rolled in, it was all hands on deck and people came from all over and really rallied. And it was amazing how everyone was doing everything they could. And it's when Razom went from just having maybe under 4,000 donors to 200,000 donors very quickly. And so it was a matter of you just did everything you could in the moment. So I didn't have a clear path, like I'm going to be the CEO of a $20 million nonprofit. No, life doesn't happen that way. I don't think it ever has. Um, but I am incredibly fortunate to work alongside amazing people in the United States and in Ukraine and kind of all over the place to be able to do work that really makes a difference now and makes a difference in the long term too. So um, I had been doing various in a consulting capacity, advising large nonprofits in digital transformation. And as luck would have it, I was just finishing up an engagement in February 2022
Mhm.
And so I was able to like stop that project and then just pour everything um, into into the work through Razom, really, in 22.
That's really, it sounds like very fortuitous. And I have to say that's been my path as well. I could never have predicted that I'd be running Engine. Even when I started Engine, it was sort of a small side project. And I feel very, very lucky. But also, so like you said, it's not something I could have mapped out at all to end up here. So it sounds like you've had a similar experience.
But it's like what you've done is you created something tangible, right? You put something into the world that was tangible that got other people involved. And then there's the discipline and the drive to keep building that and keep adding the right kind of people so that you're not trying to do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's, we could have a whole conversation about growing an organization and growing a team. But I actually want to go back to the basics and
Mhm,
make sure we have a chance to tell our audience all about Razom and what you guys do. Because I know that
sure.
many people will have heard of Razom. Like you said, it's really grown.
Mhm,
It's I
mhm,
think maybe the nonprofit that most Americans think of when they think, Ukraine related nonprofits. But
mhm.
I know you guys have several different directions of work, so I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about what it is that you guys are primarily focusing now.
Yeah, so starting off, Razom means together in Ukrainian, and that's been core to what we've been about since the very beginning. So we have been at it for over 10 years. Right now, our activities are sort of in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. In Ukraine, our focus is on supporting the front by saving lives. So we do a lot of work with combat medics. Our approach, combat medics, training, supplies, things like that, which overlaps a lot with our work with the healthcare sector. So we've worked with over 400 hospitals, both to deliver supplies, in-kind donations, but also to do training. So right now, this week, we have a mini MBA going where hospital administrators who are doctors who are now suddenly in charge of like managing hospitals, they go through a mini MBA program so they can do a better job of more efficiently managing those hospitals. And we've just wrapped up an observership where Ukrainian surgeons are working alongside US surgeons and really sharing expertise, because the kinds of innovations and the kinds of things that surgeons in Ukraine have to deal with really are on the cutting edge of the world. So we work on the front, we work with healthcare, and our third pillar in Ukraine is we work with community grassroots organizations, really kind of the fabric of society around the whole country, the people who understand the needs on the ground. So we work with over about 200 of those. And what that allows us to do, whether it's community grassroots organizations or hospitals or units on the front, is we really help to kind of empower people to improve the day immediately and do it in a way that makes systemic changes for the long haul. So that's our work in Ukraine. We have a warehouse, we have 2 offices, we have about 100 people on staff now. Outside of Ukraine, equally important is really all kinds of advocacy work. And it's really the kind of work that you all are doing here at Engine too, where we're making Ukraine visible to people through culture, through literature, through film. We have a big film program. We do translations. We work with academia. We have a group of about 60 student clubs, 60 campuses represented. We have a very robust film program I mentioned. So cultural diplomacy. We do political advocacy and lobbying. We have a professional team of about a dozen people full-time in Washington, D.C., making sure that the decision makers in Washington have the information they need to understand why Ukraine is a good partner for the U.S. And we also work with our donors, individuals across the United States mostly, but around the world, and really helping people understand how to kind of be engaged with Ukraine to build the kind of modern, secure, sovereign, democratic Ukraine that brought us together. Sort of that is something that Razom has been doing for over 10 years. It's really kind of those ideals of Maidan, making them real. So this two-way direction of advocating for Ukraine and making Ukraine be visible outside of Ukraine and strengthening Ukraine in Ukraine is really the kind of work that we do, by betting on individuals who are building that kind of country that we want to see. So in terms of scale, I guess I should add some numbers to this. We had been a small volunteer nonprofit. We never raised or spent any more than $200,000 a year. And then in 2022, we raised and distributed about $80 million worth of funds and physical goods. And now we're at the range of, yeah, wow, Carl, you said it in the chat. And now I'm very proud that we're at about $20 million a year where we're able to raise and deploy in Ukraine. So our focus is Ukraine. Our focus is a sovereign, secure Ukraine that contributes to the well-being of the rest of the world. So whereas other international non-governmental organizations kind of could do healthcare around the world, we're very focused. We're just about Ukraine, but making Ukraine's contribution and innovation to solving the big problems of the world possible. Oh, you muted yourself, Katerina.
Sorry about that. I'm curious, as I hear about all this amazing work that you're doing, did you work in primarily these same areas before the full-scale invasion, and it's just a matter of just getting a lot bigger, or do you feel that you changed what you were doing in terms of, stopping some directions and adding others?
So up until 2022, we had been doing lots of different kinds of things. So we had done, you can see the seeds of doing all of that somewhere, but not nearly at that level. Like we didn't have a presence in Washington, D.C. Now we have, like now when congressional staffers call our colleagues to ask for advice. But we had written a white paper here or there, So, we had been doing, we had a program called Co-Pilot where Ukrainian surgeons worked alongside American surgeons, neurosurgeons, to learn from each other. But it was very small. Now we've got dozens of trips. So we had not been doing anything on the front directly. We had worked with some veterans. We had some veteran stipend programs and things like that. I think what we're doing now, among the things we're doing now that we weren't doing before, is we now try and raise money outside of Ukraine, and we try and spend it in Ukraine. So now, for example, those medical backpacks that we deliver to Ukrainian railways, for example, so they could do first aid on the train. Those backpacks are designed and made in Ukraine. So we try and buy, or the two-way radios, instead of buying Motorola radios, we were now able to purchase radios from a Ukrainian manufacturer named Himera. So that way, each donated dollar works triple time, basically. That each donor dollar purchases something, a thing that is used by someone to save a life, but at the same time, it helps create a job in Ukraine so people can have jobs. And the money goes to a business, which then goes and pays taxes in Ukraine. So we try and kind of stretch everything out. And we certainly were not purchasing Ukraine-made stuff before. But we had been doing a lot of cultural programming, not nearly at the scale that we're doing now.
That's really great. And yes, I love also this concept of raising money outside Ukraine and spending in Ukraine. It's just what we do. Almost our entire team is Ukrainian, and then we also try, for software and things like that to use Ukrainian businesses when we can. And yeah, that triple impact, it's something that I get very excited about.
Yeah.
And I love paying taxes to the Ukrainian government. I'm like, look, like I'm helping build the future here.
In a systemic way that's, that dismantles the Soviet system of corruption, right?
Yes.
Because if you think about it, there's still a lot of the Soviet Union, like we're all over here like, yeah, it's all done. The Berlin Wall came down, we're finished. Well, we know that's not the case. There's lots of mechanisms that are still kind of carry that Soviet regime. And taxes, paying taxes is a great way to be like, no, we're building an institution. Like this is a sovereign country. This is how we do it.
Yeah, it's almost like, I don't want to say like a step of rebellion, but it is, for me, it's very meaningful because there is this legacy of just let's not pay taxes, let's do everything under the table. And so for me saying, well, every single person is hired legally and we're doing it the right way. I think, it's part of the new generation of
Hmm.
organizations. Take
Yeah,
pride not in let's save that money, but let's do it correctly.
yeah, exactly.
So something I hear a lot, and I wonder if you've heard this before in your work as well, is with the full-scale invasion, with so many, urgent needs, humanitarian, medical needs, needs on the front, which you all are focused on. It's not the only thing you do, right? You're still doing things that are more about, like, say, cultural pieces, right? Educational pieces. And with us at Engine, really focusing more in that, culture, education, communication, relationship building, community building space, rather than humanitarian needs. People sometimes ask, like, there's a war going on. Like, why is this important? What shouldn't everything, all the resources be focused on the humanitarian and medical and military needs? I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Why not stop doing all of that even when things are very tough with the war?
No, I've heard that question too. And the way I approach it, the way I think about it is, if to get to the place where I think it's fair to say we all want to get to, or, a secure, safe Ukraine that's contributing to the world, everyone's got to do what they know how to do, you know? And putting band-aids on things, like some people are really good at putting band-aids on things, literally, right? And that's what they should be doing. But there's so much, like, what is the society that, like, what a way, a short way you could say is, like, what is it that people are fighting for? What is it that people are defending? Ukraine is holding the line on democracy and rule of law, right? And making it work. So you got to have democracy and rule of law, and you got to have films that are made. You got to have the music, and you got to have the culture, and you have to understand your history and know where you're coming from. And so there there is a need for humanitarian aid organizations to do what they know how to do, which is humanitarian aid. But there's also a need for people to learn English, you know, and there's a need for education, and there's a need for businesses to develop, and so you've got to, it's important to not have everyone do, like, February 2022, everyone was just like, quick, let's do what you can to get whatever supplies you can to the front as quickly as possible. But now, like, that's optimized, and, like, there's still gaps, but there's organizations that can do that. And that's why I think it's important that, like, not everyone should try to be everything, and people really should know what they're great at and contribute that way. I do want everyone, because I've, in the 35 plus years that I've been traveling to Ukraine and seeing how the country is evolving and how much it's contributing, like, I am, like, I bet on Ukrainians, for the good of the world. Like, and so I want more people engaged and continue to be engaged and give people a reason to be engaged. And so doing, like, what we've done is, like, support the Oscar nomination, making sure people knew about the film Porcelain War, or 20 Days in Mariupol, or, like, super high quality stuff made by Ukrainians in Ukraine is incredibly powerful. And so we got to keep doing that too. You got to just do it all, but you got to do what you do well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's a message I try to share as well, because um it's not necessarily intuitive. It's interesting, like when you talk with people about the nonprofit sector, how unfamiliar with it some people are, right? And they're like, well, nonprofits should do X, Y, and Z, and they should be run this way. And it's like, well, actually, there's a whole bunch of things we can do, and maybe it's good because there's really so many fronts. And I don't know, it's, some people in Ukraine don't like saying it's I don't know if this is a front, but it's an important aspect of the work of rebuilding a country that we have to work on. And I want to ask you about another, and I think crucial aspect of your work that you've highlighted a number of ways that you connect Ukraine and Ukrainians across borders, right? Whether it's the co-pilot projects that you were doing even before the full-scale invasion in the medical space, or promoting Ukrainian films. And that very much aligns with what we're doing at Engine, connecting Ukrainians to the world, essentially, right? So I'm curious to hear why you think connection across borders is important today, and and will be in the future, and how these connections can help Ukrainians.
Great question. So the big answer is, the reason it's important is because the world is round and small, and we all, cross paths. The more sort of in more detailed answer, like we can speak very sort of tangibly, economically, like the amount of food that's produced in Ukraine that feeds the rest of the world, is massive. And so when grain can't get out of the country, when it can't leave Ukraine, it has massive bad implications around the world. I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but like in terms of sort of how much of, like, how many countries in Africa have been relying on food from Ukraine. So actions in Ukraine really do have ramifications around the rest of the world. And so recognizing that is important. And that's just kind of sustaining. But then if you think about the potential, if you think about the innovation, the sort of clever solutions to problems, how do you really approach climate change or income inequality? Like, Ukraine has a lot to contribute there. So it's important that people in Ukraine have the tools to develop their human capacity and have a way to contribute that to the rest of the world. And so that's something, I think about. A couple weeks ago, I was able to participate in an event in Brooklyn here at the Veselka restaurant, where under the auspices of several sort of UN entities, there was people from different missions, different United Nations member states, came together to learn how to make this Easter bread, kind of, and it was part of a program that was also done. It was done in Ukraine and in several countries in Western Europe, where you baked the bread using flour that was grown from wheat that was on fields that had been demined. And so you had like these multiple layers, and people were able to learn about the grain and the food and how much demining there is. And then also this sort of ancient ritual of, rolling the dough and making little bird shapes and stuff. So it's, we're all connected. And so, and over the past, several generations, people in Ukraine have really, if you sort of flexed their muscles, learned their muscles of civic engagement and democracy, and been working really, really hard on things that, frankly, in my native America, we've kind of forgotten about, and we're just now relearning. And so I'm reminded in sort of participating in American civic life, I'm reminded of some of my conversations in like 1989, 1990, when I was in Ukraine, or 91. And you sort of, when you're really kind of realizing like, oh no, wait, there's a reason I vote, and how do I vote? And is the vote just like a ballot that's been stuffed, or is there like, how do I engage with my community, whether it's, if not on the country level, like at my school board, and how do I make my voice heard? And, oh, actually, I have to get up and do something. So that's been something really tremendous to be able to observe and participate in, both in the United States and in Ukraine.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about Ukraine being able to contribute to the rest of the world, because often we think about, well, how do we help Ukraine? But one of the main things I'm proud about at Engine is that we are sort of gotten away from the traditional victim slash savior dynamic in the nonprofit sector, right? We build relationships between equals. And you were talking about people, right? The volunteers and the students. But when we're talking about nations, all right, it's not just about the world helping Ukraine. I mean, in the IT sector, right now in the military innovation, Ukraine is at the forefront, like US is learning from Ukraine about how to use some of these tools. The DIA app, for those who have not heard of it yet, maybe Emily, you can drop a link. It's multiple other countries actually learning how to do basically the government online from Ukraine. And I know I've had several colleagues from Ukraine visit the US, and they look at some things, they're like, this is so backward. You guys still use credit cards to pay for things, you guys use cash. It's really funny because it really is a lot of opportunities, to have a symbiotic relationship and for Ukraine to contribute and not just sort of take and benefit, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly. And the online payment, when I go work in Ukraine for a while and I come back, like it's sort of like, really? Wait, do I have a credit card? Because I have to change my behavior and like, wait, so I'm in a coffee shop and I like there's a paper menu, like I can't just pay right away when I, whatever.
Yeah.
So small things like that are pretty cool to experience. And it's one of the reasons I really enjoy working here with alongside colleagues in Ukraine who really push me because they innovate faster because they have to, right? They have to like, so our ability to learn is, I think that's just the one blocker. Like we have to recognize or how, how do we learn to do things differently?
Yeah.
And but we have a lot of examples of that. It works. It just keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, I feel like that could be like a whole other
Yeah,
conversation too.
yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing, Dora, before I turn to
Mhm,
some of these great questions that
mhm,
I'm seeing in the chat. And this is like a very practical one. I wanted to get your perspective on how a regular American, or we have volunteers from all over the world. So a regular person who is not in Ukraine may not have the chance to go to Ukraine in person, like some volunteers are doing, can support. Obviously, already everyone here who's volunteering with us is supporting in a very impactful and tangible way, meeting with a Ukrainian every week to chat,
huge.
and that's amazing. But I know we have volunteers who want to do more, and they're curious. If I'm a regular person without a ton of money, without a ton of specialized skills,
Mhm.
what can I do? So, do you have any ideas or advice?
There's a lot you can do. And the most important thing is to do it. Because, every time I go to Ukraine, people are always so grateful that someone outside of Ukraine is paying attention. So I'm sure you hear this from your partners when you do the Zoom conversations, but I'm just here to double underline underscore that the degree to which people in Ukraine, especially if you can't get a good night's sleep, but the degree to which people appreciate that there's people outside of Ukraine paying attention means a lot. So please keep doing that. Um, the second most important thing to do is to be loud about what you're doing. And loud doesn't mean screaming, it's whatever makes you comfortable. But help other people in your communities know that you're speaking with someone from Ukraine regularly. Make it real. I've found it to be very effective to mention that, oh yeah, this I bought it at a shopping mall in Ukraine. This shirt, I bought it in a shopping mall in Ukraine. Oh, my purse, yeah, it's made in Ukraine, and people who only see this like devastation and destruction of Ukraine are oftentimes like, wait, you bought something in Ukraine, or something is made in Ukraine, and then I go on to say that, well, yeah, I've just last quarter I spent about a month of time in Ukraine working alongside my colleagues. Bringing it into conversation is something that Ukraine has not had in prior generations. So when my grandfather was fighting for Ukrainian independence during World War I, he didn't have he and his colleagues, lawyer that he was, didn't have the advantage of what we're doing right now. Basically, at this very moment, we have people I've noticed from all over the planet logging in and having a conversation. So for Ukraine to be a robust sovereign democracy, like any country, it needs friends around the world. And so if you can, keep having your meetings and share about what did you learn from the person, like make it real, work it into conversation, try and mention that wherever you can, whether it's in the coffee shop or at the school meeting or riding in a taxi at the gas station, drop it in, just like wear it on your sleeve, like wear your Ukraine interest on your sleeve. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is the straight up political engagement. If we've learned anything from Ukrainians and from the Revolution of Dignity, is that you as a citizen have rights, and you also have, each of us have responsibilities. And so we have a responsibility to engage with whoever represents us. In the United States, it would be members of Congress, so House of Representatives and the Senate. Wherever else you are in the world, it is also your city council or your I live in New York, so I live in an apartment building, so my condo association, right? Like super hyper local, but letting people know it makes a difference that you pick up the phone, and in the United States you call your member of Congress at least once a week. You don't need to be an expert about weapons systems or trade deals or mineral compositions. You don't have to. All you need to do is say, here's my name, I'm in your voting district, and it's important to me that my country be a good partner to Ukraine. That's it. All you need to do is be vocal about the fact that you're paying attention to Ukraine, and it's important for you that Ukraine be secure, sovereign, and free. You don't need to get into anything else. But doing those things, so engaging with Ukrainians, living it out on living your Ukraineness on your sleeve, quite literally, and engage with whoever it is represents you in your political structure, whether it's at the federal level or at a regional level or at a hyper-local level. That is crucially important. And that's something each of us can do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we actually had a great question from a volunteer. For those who would want to learn a little bit more about talking points, what to ask for to government decision makers. Although I want to highlight, Dora, that, when I do it many weeks, I just say, hey, I'm just calling to thank you for your support of Ukraine. If they support Ukraine already, which you think, oh, if they support Ukraine, don't call them. No, if you want them to keep supporting Ukraine, you got to call, you got to email. I leave voicemails because I'm very shy. So I wait till the office closes. I'll call and I'll leave a message. That counts. Sometimes I fill out the online form, but you can keep it very general. But then sometimes, if someone does want to read up on what are the policy issues, do you have any suggestions? I feel like Razom probably has something that people can access, which says, here's what's going on and here's some points you can make.
We do. We issue all kinds of policies all the time. So definitely follow Razom both on Instagram and Facebook. If you're interested in sort of US policy specifically, follow us on Twitter X. We've recently launched a new thing where one of my colleagues, Mykola Morsky, has more Instagram content where he talks through very specific things happening now. So follow Mykola Morsky. It's Morsky, ends with a J, which you can get off any of our other Razom accounts. And then, we've also helped launch the American Coalition for Ukraine, which is hundreds of very grassroots organizations that we come together twice a year in Washington, D.C. So that's very Washington, U.S.
Yeah,
focused.
I go there.
Yeah, good. And we issue, there's talking points that come out of that. And so basically our Twitter feed is really the best place to get the policy stuff the fastest, or on our website, razomforukraine.org, in the advocacy section. So that's and sign up for our newsletter. It's only once a month, but you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. Blue Sky, we've started putting some content there, but it's also, it's always a matter of who can spend time on what platform and how much time do we spend on which platform. Same goes for TikTok.
Yeah, you guys, that's so funny, Dora, to hear that you said you're a $20 million organization now. You don't have enough capacity to do, because people ask me like, why aren't you in Blue Sky all the time? And I'm like, as soon as I can find someone who can do the work, I will be on Blue Sky. But it's funny, you always think like when you get big enough, you'll have enough resources for everything. Nope, nope, that's not
Well,
true.
and it's also about prioritization too. Like,
Right.
where are we going to have the biggest impact? Where are we going to have the biggest
Mhm.
bang for a buck? And that
Yeah.
goes back to your question about humanitarian aid also, like why shouldn't we just keep sending individual first aid kits or, stuff like that? It's like, what the question we ask ourselves here is like, what can we be doing to have the biggest impact right now and in the future? Like, what's the stuff that we can do that other people can't do? And so
Yeah.
that also goes to like, can't be on every
Mhm.
single social media platform, but how do we, like, what's
Yeah.
the right mix of being able to communicate so that people know what we're doing and how to engage. Um,
Mhm.
but that's not distracting
Yeah.
for too
Yeah, yeah, and Emily has been sharing some links, so I absolutely encourage
great.
everyone to check these out. And there's, the American Coalition has a WhatsApp group. There's the email newsletter. So there's no like one platform. I feel like people can find what they're
Also,
comfortable with.
also, also
Um,
once a week, if you're in DC, we do Wednesday nights have a call, which you'll pick up if you follow any of these things, where there's a policy call. It's
yeah,
a
those are
Zoom
I've gone to
webinar
a
now.
couple
It's
of
got
those, and they're
nine
really
o'clock nine
useful.
o'clock Eastern on Wednesdays.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, lot of resources there. And we also had some comments about talking about Ukraine more informally, which I just want um, to respond to this concern that some people don't want to talk about Ukraine because it's political. I think it's absolutely true. I think for me, it's kind of like what you
Hmm.
said, right? Like, oh, like they'll compliment your shirt. Oh, I got it in Ukraine, right? I
Yeah.
wear a lot of Ukrainian stuff, so it's very easy to talk about Ukraine because people will compliment it. And I try not to just wear the traditional things that people would associate as being Ukrainian, but more modern
Mm-hmm.
things too, where they just have no idea.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you have really cool designers there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's things like, someone saying their renovation is running late. I'm like, oh, my engine buddy's renovating her office and it's been, delayed by 6 months because so many people have been drafted and it's hard to get, people, but they finally finished it and they opened it. So it's just like very natural stuff where you're bringing to the conversation because it's part of my life. And so, yeah, I think if you're not lecturing, but just sort of bringing it up in a natural way, it's very powerful and very doable.
That it's immensely powerful. Because look, we're not going to launch some alternative media company that's going to do battle with disinformation that's getting billions of dollars invested in by the bad guys, right? But what we can do is exactly what you just said, Katerina, which is like, yeah, renovations are tough, and my colleague is slowed down, and you just kind of weave it into the conversation, like, oh yeah, half the contractors were drafted or something like that.
Mhm.
And someone just mentioned putting a Ukrainian flag on the front door. Though that matters. That matters. And people from Ukraine who visit oftentimes tell me how encouraging it is to see the Ukrainian flag out and about. And it's got a good design. It's very simple. It's not busy. But it is a way to literally be like, yeah, I'm paying attention. I'm paying attention to this country, or and you should be thinking about it too. So it doesn't have to, it I can see, I appreciate what the person said about it becoming political. It becomes political, but it doesn't have to be political. It's just human beings living their lives, and you've got access to them, right? You have some kind of connection to people living in this one particular part of the world. And so what's that like for you? What does that mean for you? I think it's more powerful to talk about renovations and coffee and beer, and clothes, than trying to talk about politics. Like, there's plenty of people talking about politics. There's not enough people just like watching a film. I mean, Stop Zemля, outstanding film. We have a list on our website of like really super high quality films. We're putting together a reading of a play. Oh, one of my colleagues right now is at Eurovision. So, you can talk about like there's so many different flavors of things that are being created in Ukraine. So whether it's Eurovision, or we put together this sold out concert at Carnegie Hall back in 2022 for the 100th anniversary of the North American premiere of Carol of the Bells, which is a Ukrainian song, which is always great to talk about it at the holiday season. But like any one of those things, you can just kind of weave into your conversation. And it's almost like you could do it as a scavenger hunt, challenge yourself. See if you can
Yes.
weave everyday Ukraine into some conversation and call your member of Congress each week.
Yeah, Carol of the Bells for sure. I just had my one remaining Russian friend. She was over, and my kid was teaching her kid to play Carol of the Bells. I was like, "Look, your kid's playing a Ukrainian song," and she was like, "What? That's not Ukrainian." I was like, "Well, wait till you hear."
Actually,
Yeah, so
yeah,
we can always weave it in. I want to make sure we have time for maybe a couple more questions. I see
sure.
we're getting close to time. I wanted to ask a great audience question about Razom's future if and when the war ends, say in a happy way, and there is, a free Ukraine and there's not these same needs on the front anymore. Have you thought about how you might shift directions, or do you feel like you'll be doing
Mhm.
mostly some the same directions other than helping on the front?
Yeah, no, we talk about this a lot and we work on this a lot. We're in it for the long haul. So the mission as we set it out in 2014 stays the same today. And regardless of the number of ballistic missiles and drones that are heading towards Ukraine, we're going to keep doing the same. We're going to keep working towards the same goal. How we do it, sure, will change. It has changed. We used to deliver a lot of individual first aid kits. Now we don't, there's less of a demand for that, so we don't do that, but we are training people on how to be sort of better training trainers of combat medics. We are purchasing stabilization points manufactured in Ukraine that can be traveled wherever. So we always shift what we do to have the biggest impact. Why we do it stays the same. So if the uninvited neighbor from next door, when the uninvited neighbor goes back home and people in Ukraine can be people in Ukraine again, our work's going to continue. We're going to be betting on Ukrainians. The projects and the names and the individual activity that we do might change, but the same kind of fundamental work of sort of betting on people who are building the kind of modern, diverse, secure Ukraine that we want, that's going to stay the same no matter what. So even, a lot of people recently have been asking me like, oh, what are you going to do with the ceasefire? What are you going to, it's like, we're going to keep doing the work, I mean, I want fewer drones and missiles falling on the heads of my colleagues and family. I want that. So that we can keep doing our work. But, I want children to not be stolen, abducted and taken into families in the Russian Federation and re-educated. I want that stopped. I want Ukrainians to be able to be citizens of Ukraine. But our work, is always going to be focused on that, working in whatever the conditions are.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And we get questions like this at Engine too, especially people that don't realize that we were around before the full-scale invasion. Will you guys shut down when it ends? No, we'll even do more of it, right? We were here
Yeah.
before the full-scale invasion, and we're here during, and we'll be here after. And I think that goes to what you were saying about seeing Ukraine is more than the war, right? There is the bigger picture here of building a young democracy, of building a strong nation, and that's something that really doesn't change
Mhm.
all that much at its core, whether there's active fighting or not. So
Mhm.
it's very looking forward to
Yeah.
seeing what that happens. Hopefully soon. Yeah, we can hope to see how your work evolves.
Well, and this is where this community, where, every single person on this call, and I'm so impressed at 64 people I'm looking, each person on this call has an important role to play in all of that work by making, by connecting Ukraine to the world and by giving people a chance to sort of leapfrog and learn from everything, all the innovation coming out of Ukraine.
Yeah, so that's what we hope to do. I have an interesting question here about the new pope, and if you've thought at all about what impact that might have on the war and on Ukraine's situation.
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think certainly the Pope's recent statements about Ukraine and about sort of the need for essentially a just peace is really heartening, to have another voice in another community that has massive global reach is incredibly powerful, because again, it's someone who, you know, it's yay for the Pope. Yes, Lucille, yay for the Pope. You know, just the humanity of it is sort of is fundamental of what, you know, what's happening in Ukraine. Like really, Ukraine just wants to be Ukraine. And I think having, it would be amazing if the Pope were to come visit Ukraine soon, because of that kind of global reach in an environment where, let's face it, there's just massive amounts of resources poured into disinformation. And I use that term very broadly, including, Katerina, like your friend not realizing that Carol of the Bells was written by a Ukrainian composer who was shot by, you know, a KGB agent, right? That's decades, that's generations of disinformation, right? Of stuff like intentional policies to sort of destroy Ukrainian language and Ukrainian identity. And that's still going on. And so when you've got the Pope kind of recognizing Ukraine as a sovereign country, in the structure of the Catholic Church and the Catholic community, that's immensely heartening.
Yeah, I agree, and hopefully it brings, you know, more positive attention and support. I'm going to ask you one last question in the interest of time. So we were talking about taxes a little bit earlier, and you also briefly mentioned income inequality. So we have a question from a volunteer about Ukraine's tax system, which, as you know, is a flat tax system versus in the US, we have a progressive tax system. Something that I learned recently is that our progressive tax system actually dates back from the Civil War here in the US in order to raise money for the war. So I wonder if you've, you know, heard or thought at all about this, you know, because it would seem the flat tax system actually promotes more income inequality and also makes it harder to raise revenue. So is this something that is, you think, realistic at all in Ukraine to have a progressive tax system? Is this something that people are talking about or might happen, or is there a reason that, you know, it's a totally different system than the US?
I don't know nearly enough about tax systems to answer that with any in any way that would contribute to that a specific response to it. What I will say is that taxes are an instrument of governmental structures in order to function, and you want a government so it's not total individual chaos, right? Like if, let's assume, let's start off like governments have a role to play. At the same time, you know, Ukraine is in Europe, and Ukraine, I think, you know, Ukraine is making the moves towards EU ascension, towards becoming a full member state of the European Union. And that's going to guide and define the tax structure, right? So I look at that as a way of a couple things happening. One, it's the continued dismantling of the Soviet system, which is, I think, still going on. Two, it's a way to institutionalize Ukraine's engagement with other Western European countries. And three, and this is the really exciting thing, it's a way for Ukraine to reform and revolutionize the European structure, right? So Ukrainian Ukrainian innovation. I was actually at Davos for the first time this year at the World Economic Forum, and I was meeting with all these executives from Western European international companies like big pharma and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, productivity in Europe. Oh, we don't have enough productivity. And I'm like, your productivity answer is in Ukraine, where the innovation is so fast. I mean, we were just talking about this with the like paying in restaurants, right? And DIA and things like that. So I think of the tax structure in Ukraine as reforming. I hesitate to use the word modernizing, but like reforming and evolving within the context of entering the European Union space and improving the European Union itself. So I think that's what I'd like to see happening more and more. It's going to be super hard. And then maybe someday Ukraine can revolutionize the US tax structure. So,
Sounds wonderful. Well, I could talk to you for hours, Dora, but I want to be respectful of your time and the time of everyone on the call. So I do think we will wrap it up there. If anyone has any burning questions that we didn't get to, feel free to feel free to email Emily, and then we'll work with Dora's team and get those answered, or we'll answer
yeah.
them. We can do so ourselves. Emily will drop her email into the chat for any follow-ups, and of course we will send out the recording and the links that Emily has here for different resources that Dora mentioned. So at this point, I just want to thank you again, Dora, for a wonderful conversation, for your time and for your inspiration. Truly, all of this that we've built here is influenced by your wonderful work at Razom, and it's so great that Razom exists.
No, thank you. I'm so glad that you guys do the work, and I'm glad you picked up the phone or sent an email back in the spring 2020 when you met my colleague at Razom. And I really just want to applaud and thank everyone here for the work that you do, because, you know, this is like this is how it's going to work. Like, for us to be in it in the long haul, we got to just stay engaged directly with Ukraine and encourage more people to be curious about Ukraine. And then once people see how awesome Ukraine is, I'm sure it's all gonna, everything's gonna work out. Everything's gonna work out as long as we do something each day. So
Yeah,
thank you
все
very
буде
much for the
Україна, as
opportunity.
we
Все
say.
буде Україна. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. It's really, really awesome. I appreciate it.
All right,
Thanks.
well, have a great rest of your day. Goodbye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye.